Morning everyone, and thank you very much. So by way of introduction, I work for DXC, and it's good to see many of our clients in the audience today. And we're a large systems integrator, so we do a lot of the work that you've heard about this morning, involving implementing GenAI, large language models, and all of those sorts of things. My own background, just a brief word, I spent 20 years on the sell side, so a lot of work in the capital markets, primarily commercial paper and bond origination, but also structured finance and securitization. So it's a particular area of interest. We cover all industries, but financial services are a particularly big one for us. So hopefully this will change. Okay. So the agenda for today, firstly to have a look at the background of the AI market and what's happening in AI in general. And then talk a little bit about scaling out. So in other words, what do you do from a practical point of view if you want to use GenAI and Agentic AI in particular, and what are the benefits and what are the particular use cases. And then we'll look at some of the use cases in general and go through some of the particular things that the industry is looking at the moment. So moving then on to the background. There we go. So overall, the size of the market is pretty huge, and the amount of money that's going into the market overall is getting bigger. The annual sort of growth rate at the moment, depends on who you talk to, but is around about 25% annual growth year on year in AI overall. Some people, Microsoft most recently, think that growth over the next few years is going to be at about 50%. So we're talking about $4 trillion going into the market at the moment, and potentially another $2.5 trillion coming in over the next couple of years. So overall, the market is very big. It's growing a lot, and the reason for that is people are seeing a lot of value in the AI market overall. So looking at a breakdown of where all that money is going, I won't go through all of those cases over there, but the fastest growing segment, and should be no surprise to everybody, the fastest growing segment is certainly the large language models and natural language processing right now. That doesn't mean to say that it's going to continue expanding indefinitely. We think that the overall fraction of large language models, GenAI and those sorts of things, and Agentic AI, will eventually plateau at about sort of 35% or thereabouts. There are plenty of other use cases for AI. This one is the one that's in the news at the moment. In particular, FSIs right now, for whatever reason, are seeing the biggest amount of expansion right now. So the entire industry pretty much is spending a lot of money on LLMs, on chatbots, on all the various different use cases. And we think that's going to continue quite strongly through FY25. So there's a lot going in, and in particular on the AI side. So this is basically what we see right now in the market, and we talk to and work with basically almost the entire market in one way or the other. So most FSIs, is there anybody in the room that hasn't played with GenAI or played with Perplexity.ai or ChatGPT or anything like that? Anyone who hasn't played with it? Okay. So there's not a single person in the room that hasn't tried it one way or the other, and that's pretty much reflective of the industry as a whole. Everybody has tried it. Very few people, or let's say, I shouldn't say very few, but comparatively fewer people, besides, let's say, chatbots, have got things that are working in production for real use cases. So how many people have got major use cases that are beyond chatbots, that aren't just the chatbots? Okay, so 3 or 4 out of the room. So everyone's tried it. Almost everybody has got a chatbot, and a couple of people have got something that's beyond the chatbot. And that's pretty much what we'd expect at the moment. So looking at what the use cases are, and some of them are a little bit sort of subtle, perhaps, where are you going to make money and where are you going to achieve the big costs? Well, the first one is productivity tools. The cost of IT for you should decline. Either it should decline or the guys should get more productive. The amount of code that's going into the repositories right now, about 70% of it is generated by GenAI right now. So the productivity improvements are pretty big. Security, and I'll talk more about that in a minute as well. security is a major concern. And it's not just, can somebody break into my data center? It's not just that anymore. Some of it is a little bit more subtle. How was the model trained? And it's kind of an important one. If you ask DeepSeek, for example, what happened in Tiananmen in 1989, right? You get some interesting answers, right? So it's the security risks that you have aren't just can you crack the GenAI or can you crack my data center? It's what does the model actually say and how is the model biased? And then I guess the last point, and it comes back to the first ones that we spoke about, is it's all very well to play with GenAI, and we've all played with it, but how do you actually use it in production and how do you use it safely? And it isn't just a matter of people playing with stuff that they shouldn't. There are quite a lot of legal risks associated with GenAI, and it's important to make sure we've got the right framework to cover the whole thing. So, and this is where I guess the sales pitch basically starts is, you need productionizable platforms.
Can you talk close to the mic, sorry?
Oh, sorry. Here we go. Okay. I need to speak louder or closer to the mic. Okay, so then, why is GenAI in particular important? So, GenAI really is what, I'd like to use that old JFK quote, a rising tide lifts all boats. And in his context, it was a little bit different. But in our context here, the rising tide is GenAI. And the reason it's a rising tide is it lifts the level of abstraction for computer science as a whole. So back in the 1940s with the first computers, people were playing with transistors, and a bug was actually a moth that flew into the transistors because it was attracted to the light, so they were real bugs. We went on to assembly code, to COBOL and all those good things, and nowadays we have demos out there where you basically say to a large language model, I want an application that does trading. Then it says, well, what do you want? You say, well, I want it to do trading in the FX market, I want to be making bids every 5 microseconds, and you can give a fairly detailed list of specs. The application will actually be written for you on the fly as you go along. So it's much faster, much quicker, and that is a rising tide that is lifting everything across the space. So it's broad, it's widely applicable, broad and general use cases, but most importantly for everyone here, hopefully, it's very, very easy to use for non-IT folk as well. So if you're sitting in the capital markets and there are particular things that you want, it's a lot easier to get it done for almost any use case. So the potential is there for very big efficiency increases, and one of the nice characterizations is that it's kind of like having an army of super enthusiastic young analysts working for you. And that's what the LLMs and the chatbots and the GenAI gives you. So you have a large number of people doing the work for you that you wouldn't necessarily want to do yourselves, or you'd ordinarily employ a lot of analysts to do. And the level of ability is increasing. I think somebody mentioned earlier that the average IQ of the LLMs now is about 140. So, a good junior developer perhaps, and that will increase. So the amount of tasks that the LLMs are able to undertake is going to increase a whole lot more. So 2024 very much has been the year of GenAI. So GenAI is at the mainstream, everybody's familiar with it, people are starting to use it. So it's still more in the play stage than it is in the use stage. But FY24 is when GenAI came about. FY25 is where a lot more commercial value will be realized, predominantly through Agentic AI. So what is Agentic AI? Agentic AI is basically putting LLMs in combination with each other and making them do more complex tasks as a whole. So where we are at the moment, everyone's got AI assistants of one or other sort. Where we're moving to is we're putting together AI assistants into agents to do more complex tasks, and where we're going is those are going to take over much larger swathes of business functions and business processes. And I'll give some examples in a minute or two. So what is GenAI? What is Agentic AI? So predominantly it's systems or frameworks that take a whole bunch of different large language models and put them together to do something more interesting. So for example, if you're writing code, you have one LLM that writes the code, another one that criticizes the code, another one that improves the code, another one that documents the code. So if you put all of that together, you have something that produces much broader applications much faster. It also learns from experience and has memory, and it can decide which tools to call. So If, for example, you're doing something like highway maintenance, which is what one of our clients does, you have a coordinating AI. You ask the AI to improve a section of highway I-77, and it basically starts the whole process. It says, I need to notify Sintra because they're the highway concession operators. I need the following amount of road furniture to block off the road. I need to notify the road traffic authorities. I need to put a KML layer, map the whole thing onto Google. It puts the whole thing together, the entire process together. Ordinarily, that took a couple of weeks. It does it in a couple of minutes. So it's that sort of thing that the Agentic AI is taking over. It decides which tools to call, and it decides whether or not it can also have a hand in whether or not the correctness is there for the thing that you're doing. Overall, it also displays greater autonomous behavior, and it's starting to impact all of us as well, one way or the other. So some of you might have seen, some of you might use Stripe.ai, which is one of the big payments providers. And Stripe now is making all of its APIs agentic friendly. So the expectation is that a lot of the processing that occurs in the back office is now going to occur via agentic AI. Okay, so if it would change. Right, so how do we scale out? So I've kind of given a little bit of a pitch on how the benefits of it, but what do you actually do from a real-world point of view, and in particular, how do you make sure that you're compliant with the EU AI Act? So the first thing, and again, the Act sort of mandates some of these things. It's always good to have principles and make sure that those principles are documented. We need governance processes to make sure that the principles are adhered to and the approach is maintained. And then lastly, processes that look at how we govern and how we implement AI and GenAI over the entire organization. So you want to make sure that it's not just sort of one team doing a couple of things here and there. You want to be sure that you've got AI throughout the organization in a governable sort of way, because the risks of AI are such that if you get something wrong, there's some fairly big liabilities that sit down the line. So these are some of the principles. These are I won't go through them in detail, but these are the principles that we have at the moment, and most people have got similar ones, and they kind of make sense, and again, pretty much compliant with the regs. How do we govern all of those things? On the next slide. So here's a typical sort of example. Usually people will set up an AI council or an AI board and set up something like an AI office that manages internal implementation. So the function of the council is to make sure that you've got AI that's governed in a coherent way across the organization, and in particular that any models that you use are approved, and the reason for that is you don't want to be in a situation where you've got something like your data crossing borders and going into let's say, data sovereignty jurisdictions that you're not intending to have your data sitting in. And for that reason, for example, we're building data centers for the Swiss banks inside Switzerland to make sure that the data stays on site and that you're not going out of the data sovereignty areas for your large language models. And there are a bunch of other different functions, and that's a list of some of the typical ones that people will normally have as part of your governance process for AI. So all of this is important for scaling out AI across the organization. Okay, and on the next one. So, and coming back again to the importance of processes and platforms. So this is one of my favorite quotes from Google in the NIPS conference in 2015, and I think it was Eric Schmidt, who basically said in any AI, in any machine learning project, or AI project these days, only 5% of the project is actually machine learning. The rest is glue and data. So the traditional worlds of making sure you've got large-scale enterprise application, it pretty much holds for the GenAI world or the LLM world as well. It's not enough just to have access to something on the internet. You need the glue and the integration and the systems behind it as well. Moving on. So looking at the platforms overall, we have pretty much a focus on two main themes. We have cloud platforms and we have on-prem platforms. So the cloud platforms pretty much are based on what you'd expect. So large-scale commercial implementation based on existing models and based on stuff that you access via the internet. The USP for the things that we do pretty much is that everything is commercially commercially strengthened and available for scaling across the enterprise. What we've been seeing in recent months, though, is people are a lot more focused on using GenAI in environments that they control much more strongly themselves. And DeepSeek in particular has driven this trend. So if you want something that is guaranteed to have, let's say, the highest possible levels of security, and in particular for our government and defense clients, it's particularly important to make sure that they've got complete and absolute control over where their data sits and who uses that data. So what that typically tends to mean is that you build your own data center, and not everybody necessarily wants to go down that route, but you build your own data center and you make sure that you've got everything, including the full GenAI models, full large language models, sitting on-prem where you are. And there's a bunch of different brands that we've got there, but the security and the performance usually is what drives this particular type of approach. Okay, and moving on. So that's just a typical sort of stack of a modern AI platform. So oftentimes people want things that start from the AI chips and the silicon itself all the way through to the applications. I think what the GenAI has done is accelerated most of these processes. So the application development these days, the turnaround time has gone from months, if not years, in many cases to weeks. So you can get a large-scale application now completed. This is on the left-hand side. Large-scale applications completed that are AI-based in a couple of weeks that would have taken, even 5 years ago, would have taken 6 months. So the time to value has sped up a whole heap, and those are the typical areas. Next slide. So, evolution. So what we've got so far is everybody's using, not everybody, but large numbers of people are using LLMs. Chatbots is the canonical example. And we've got people now using enterprise platforms. So you can measure the value, it works. But what's coming is the Agentic AI, and what I put there is an advert from a particular fintech called Artisan.ai. I quite like the ad. That is where people's heads are going right now. Use the Agentic AI and so on. So one thing that I wanted to just briefly touch on, again because we're seeing a lot of people asking about it, is DeepSeek. So what DeepSeek illustrates is that you've got a couple of different security risks with the AI. So in this example here, or this diagram, what I'm trying to show is you've got the user interfaces on the left-hand side. So that is the thing that calls the large language model at the back end, whether it's a chatbot, whether it's a trading application, whether it's something that helps you fill in forms for a credit application. You've got something on the left. You've got the LLM infrastructure that hosts your model, and then you've got the model itself. The reason that there's a distinction is that it's okay, or it's kind of safe to use DeepSeek, for example, if you're using the open source version of the model on your own servers or in your own space, because then you're not moving the data across the border into potentially a hostile jurisdiction. So you can take that model, you can run it on your own servers or your own Azure tenant or whatever it is you want to, and you remove the risk of data sovereignty being impeded, but on the other hand, you still don't know how it's trained. So you've got a bunch of different risks. You've changed the risks a little bit if you run DeepSeek in your own space, not in the Chinese servers, but you still haven't obviated the risks entirely, and that's the risks relating to the model creation and the training. So any questions on DeepSeek or any of the issues relating to that? So I know that it's tasked a couple of people in the room recently, and it's just quite important to be aware of the different risks of the LLMs depending on whether you're looking at the model itself or where the model is hosted or how the model was created, and the EU AI Act impacts on all of those. Okay, all right, moving on then to the next slide. Sorry, I've gone one too far. Just as an aside as well, the timeline of the EU AI Act is up on the board there. Hopefully most people in the room are looking at it and implementing it already. If not, it's quite important to be doing that now. And although it sounds like a fairly abstract piece of legislation sometimes, it's got some pretty real consequences. And the things that Hannah was mentioning earlier, for example, they've got quite real implications for how you do AI internally. So if you want to be able to trace something, for example, to trace a decision, right? If you have an AI that makes a credit decision, or even that influences a credit decision, the regulators basically demand that you're able to explain how that decision occurred. And if you want to explain how that decision occurred, you have to be able to reproduce it. If you want to reproduce how that decision occurred, you have to have the snapshot of the data that was taken when the model was created. And you have to have the model. So it basically puts a whole lot of burden on top of your overall AI modeling and usage process, which again goes back to the point, it's really important to have a coordinated enterprise level platform approach, because if you don't, and you've got some little team doing something in the back room corner, you've got no control or knowledge over how that model was produced, and consequently you can't explain to the regulators when they ask how that model got to its decision. So that's the one point. And the second point is that it also is quite important about the choice of models. You know, a lot of people, traders in particular, get quite nervous about using models with billions of parameters because you cannot explain how the model came to its decision. There's simpler models that are tree-based, which are quite easy to see because it says if this, then that, if this, then that, you know, a random forest type model. Those are easy to explain and easy to justify. So you can justify a trading decision quite simply if you have a tree, but you can't if you have something with 600 billion parameters. Doesn't work. So important to have that overall perspective on AI usage throughout the organization, because there's some quite real potential issues down the line. And I think the earlier phrase was quite a good one. There's immense potential, but there's non-negotiable compliance. So, and that's pretty important, and that's going to become much more important for all of us fairly shortly. Okay, next slide, please. Right, a couple of quick use cases. So I've used this one here because it's a fairly easy one. So L1 and L support, for those who are not familiar with support in an IT sort of context. You've got different levels of support. L0 is something that's fully automated. L1 is somebody who needs to help me with control alt delete. And L2 is a little bit more complicated. Murex isn't working and my Murex login is down, or the trading workbench isn't working. So what's really important from a cost point of view is to keep replies automated. The more people you have, the more expensive it gets. This particular organization, the problem that they had was they had a hell of a lot of different applications, and it was almost impossible to automate solutions. So what we put together, next slide please, is an agentic solution, so with a chatbot front end, but there are a whole bunch of different agents, and all the agents talk to each other, and you can actually see it on screen. It's quite impressive. The agents talk to each other in much the same way that a bunch of humans would, to try and figure out what the problem was and what to do. So the agents read the documentation, they read the APIs, they figure it out, they reason, and they come up with a solution. And the net result of that is your IT costs go down a whole lot. Next slide, please. And this is just, let's say, what we see pretty much as standard throughout most banks at the moment. Everybody has deployed large language models. Most people are looking at developer productivity, because again, it's such a big cost saving or efficiency improvement. And where we're going is entire process automation through Agentic AI. So a whole back office can be automated, a whole mortgage processing area can be automated, and a whole IT support area can be automated. So that's where we're going, and that's where the most activity is at the moment. Next slide, please. And there are a couple of more specific examples that we are either working on at the moment or we've recently completed. So for a major US client, enterprise-wide GenAI, and they've got very measurable TCV improvements there, which is nice to see. Compliance analytics, we're helping a couple of people speed up their KYC processes in particular and make them more predictable. Everybody, one way or the other, is using GenAI for code, and in particular for legacy modernization. So if you've got an old mainframe and you're sorting it out, it's quicker to do it with GenAI. And lastly, AI layering. So if you've got 4 or 5 different capital market systems and you want to get analytics across the whole of them all at the same time, it's quite important to put all of the data together and to run your models across the whole data set, and you get a lot of pickup as a consequence. So that's another fairly common use case right now. And the additional thing is you remove the load from the transactional platforms. Right, so in conclusion then, AI and GenAI and Agentic AI is very much the rising tide that lifts all boats. Real commercial value is realizable right now, and we're seeing a lot of people achieve that. It's important to transform the whole operating model. It's not enough just to have nice tech and have people playing with nice tech. You've got to have the ability to justify to the regulators all decisions that are made and all the ways that the AI was used. And consequently, it's really important to implement the appropriate platforms throughout the organization. And with that, thank you very much, and hoping to meet some of you in the breakout.